The police siren cut through the heat of the afternoon. A patrol car stopped in the middle of the street, lights flashing red and blue, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. On the sidewalk, an elderly woman knelt on the concrete, her hands pressed together, her shoulders shaking as tears ran down her deeply wrinkled face. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "My grandson is very sick. He has a high fever. I just need you to take us to the hospital." The officer stepped out of the car slowly, adjusting his belt, a crooked smile forming on his face. "Go cry in your house," he said coldly. People stopped to watch. Some pulled out their phones. Some whispered. But no one stepped forward. No one defended her. And no one imagined that those cruel words would come back to haunt the man who said them. Before we continue, if you believe that faith still matters, that kindness can change even the hardest hearts, take a moment to subscribe to Heaven Walks With Us. These stories aren't just meant to be heard. They're meant to remind us that no one is ever truly alone. Now let me tell you who that woman was and why her tears would not be ignored. Her name was Esperanza. She was 72 years old, her body thin and worn down by decades of work, her hands marked by soap, water, and sacrifice. That afternoon, she had walked out of her small metal shack at the edge of the neighborhood with only one thought in her mind: saving her grandson's life. Carlitos was 6. For 2 days, he had burned with fever. He barely ate. His small body trembled as he lay on a thin mattress on the floor, breathing fast, his lips dry and pale. Esperanza had tried everything she knew: cold cloths, whispered prayers, promises she wasn't sure she could keep. But nothing worked. She had no money for a taxi. The hospital was more than 3 kilometers away, and she was too weak to carry him that far. So when she saw the patrol car slowly driving down the street, she did something she had never done before. She dropped to her knees. The police vehicle stopped. The engine hummed softly as the officer inside watched her through the windshield. After a moment, he stepped out. His partner stayed in the car, arms crossed, eyes fixed forward. "What do you want?" the officer asked. Esperanza raised her face, wet with tears. "Please, officer, my grandson is very sick. He has a high fever. I just need help getting him to the hospital." The officer laughed under his breath. "You think I'm your personal driver?" he said. "You want a free ride?" "It's only 10 minutes, Esperanza pleaded. "I don't have money. I'm old. I can't carry him that far." A small group of neighbors had begun to gather. Some looked uncomfortable. Some avoided her eyes. One woman quietly lifted her phone and started recording. The officer shook his head. "All poor old women tell the same story," he said mockingly. "A sick grandson. A hungry child. You know how many times I hear that every day?" Esperanza looked around, searching faces for help. None came. "Please," she whispered again. "He's just a child." The officer turned away. "Go cry in your house," he said sharply. "You're bothering people." Esperanza slowly stood up, her knees cracking as she straightened. "Did you really just tell me that?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," the officer replied, pointing down the street. "Go cry in your little shack, and next time, have money if you want help." Murmurs spread through the crowd, but no one spoke up. No one stepped in. The officer got back into the patrol car. His partner said nothing. The engine roared, and within seconds they were gone. Esperanza stood alone on the sidewalk, shaking, not just from fear, but from humiliation. She clenched her fists, feeling something break inside her. As the patrol disappeared around the corner, she lifted her eyes to the sky. "God," she whispered, "if you see me, if you truly see me, please help my grandson." And though the street fell silent again, her prayer did not disappear into the air. It was heard. Esperanza turned away from the empty street and began walking back home. Each step felt heavier than the last. The sun was still high, pressing down on the neighborhood, making the cracked pavement shimmer. Around her, life went on as if nothing had happened. Doors closed, curtains shifted, voices faded behind walls. No one followed her. At the end of the street stood the small metal shack she called home. Sheets of rusted tin formed its walls, patched together with nails and hope. When it rained, water leaked through the roof. When the wind blew, the metal rattled like an old drum. She pushed the door open. Inside, the heat was suffocating. The air smelled of damp metal and old fabric. On the floor against the far wall lay a thin mattress. Carlitos was there, curled on his side, his small chest rising and falling too fast. Abuelita, he murmured when he heard her, his eyes barely opening. Esperanza rushed to him and knelt, placing her hand on his forehead. It burned, hotter than before. His skin was slick with sweat, his breathing shallow, uneven. "I'm here, my love," she whispered, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm here." Carlitos tried to sit up, but his body trembled. Esperanza gently helped him drink a few sips of water from a cracked plastic cup. It was all she had left. Half a jug, no food, no medicine. "Did my mama come?" he asked softly. Esperanza felt her throat tighten. "Not yet, my angel, but she will. You'll see." Carlitos nodded weakly and closed his eyes again. Esperanza sat beside him, her back against the cold metal wall. The sound of the street outside felt distant now, as if she were underwater. She listened to her grandson's breathing, counting each rise and fall of his chest, afraid that one day it might stop between numbers. Her mind drifted back to earlier years, to a time when life had been hard but not cruel, when her husband Roberto was still alive, when laughter still lived in their home, when she never imagined begging on her knees in the street. She pushed the memories away. Now was not the time for the past. She stood and walked to the small corner that served as a kitchen. 2 burners, no gas, an empty shelf where food used to be. She searched anyway, as if something might appear if she looked hard enough. Nothing. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time that day, Esperanza allowed herself to cry. Not loudly, not desperately, but silently, the way people cry when they no longer have strength to beg. She returned to Carlitos and knelt beside him again. "God," she whispered, clasping her hands, her forehead resting on the edge of the mattress. "I don't ask for riches. I don't ask for comfort. I only ask this. Please don't take him." Her voice shook. "He hasn't lived yet. He hasn't done anything wrong. If someone has to suffer, let it be me. I've already lived my life." The metal roof creaked softly as a breeze passed overhead. Carlitos stirred and reached for her hand. His fingers were weak but warm. "Abuelita," he said, barely audible. "Don't cry." Esperanza squeezed his hand gently and forced another smile. "I'm not crying, my love. I'm just talking to God." Carlitos's lips curved into the smallest smile. "He listens to you," he whispered. Esperanza closed her eyes, holding on to that fragile faith like a lifeline. Outside, the sun slowly began to sink, and inside the small metal room, hope flickered, fragile, trembling, but still alive. Esperanza did not wait for the night to come. She laid a thin sheet over Carlitos, kissed his damp forehead, and whispered that she would be back soon. He nodded weakly, too tired to ask where she was going. She stepped outside and closed the metal door behind her, the sound echoing louder than it should have. The first house was only 2 doors away. She knocked gently, then again, louder. After a moment, the door opened, just enough for a woman's face to appear. "I'm sorry to bother you," Esperanza said quickly. "My grandson is very sick. Could you lend me a little money? Just enough for the doctor." The woman's eyes shifted past her, down the street. "I don't have any," she replied, already shaking her head. "I barely have enough for my own family." The door closed. Esperanza did not argue. She moved on. At the corner, she stopped at a small grocery shop. The owner, a man she had known for years, listened as she spoke, her words tumbling over each other. "Maybe I can clean for you," she offered. "Wash floors. Anything." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Esperanza, I wish I could help, but you already owe me. If I keep lending, I'll lose my business." She nodded, embarrassed, and stepped back onto the street. She crossed to the other side and knocked on another door, then another. Each time the answer was different, but the meaning was the same. "I can't. Not today. Come back another time." "I'm sorry." The sun moved lower in the sky as Esperanza walked. Her legs ached, her chest felt tight. Still, she kept going. Finally, she reached the public clinic. The waiting area was crowded. Mothers held crying babies. Elderly men leaned against walls, eyes closed. Esperanza joined the line at the entrance, standing for what felt like hours, her thoughts fixed on Carlitos's face. When it was finally her turn, The nurse didn't look up. Insurance card? She asked. I don't have one, Esperanza said quietly. But my grandson has a very high fever. He's very sick. Without insurance, you'll need to pay, the nurse replied. Emergency care is 800 pesos. Esperanza felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. I don't have that, she whispered. But I can work. I can clean. Please. The nurse sighed, her tone flat. You can wait for emergency intake. The line is about 6 hours. 6 hours. Esperanza glanced at the waiting room. People sat on the floor. Some had been there since morning. Carlitos didn't have 6 hours. She stepped outside, the evening air hitting her face like cold water. She stood on the sidewalk, breathing slowly, forcing herself not to scream. Every door had closed. Every path had ended. She pressed her hand to her chest and looked up at the darkening sky. God, she whispered, I tried everything. And with that, Esperanza turned back toward the metal shack, empty-handed, exhausted, and afraid of what she might find waiting for her inside. Esperanza had only taken a few steps away from the clinic when her strength finally gave out. She stopped at the edge of the sidewalk and leaned against a concrete post, pressing her palm to her chest. The world felt too loud, too fast. Her legs trembled, and for a moment she thought she might collapse right there, unseen, unnoticed. Just another old woman disappearing into the noise of the city. Are you all right, ma'am? The voice was calm, gentle. Esperanza turned, startled. A man stood a few feet away from her. He looked to be in his mid-30s, dressed simply in worn jeans and a plain shirt. In one hand, he carried a thin plastic bag with bread and a carton of milk. Nothing about him stood out. No uniform, no authority, no urgency. I'm fine, Esperanza lied quickly, wiping her eyes with the corner of her shawl. Thank you. The man didn't move closer. He didn't stare. He just looked at her, not with pity, not with discomfort, but with attention, as if he were truly seeing her. Your grandson is sick, he said softly. Esperanza froze. Yes, she replied after a pause. He has a fever. It's been days. I heard you inside, the man explained. At the desk. She nodded, her shoulders sinking. They won't see him without money. He was quiet for a moment, as if weighing something unseen. Have you tried cooling him down with wet cloths? He asked. Yes, she answered. All day, all night. It doesn't last. Children need more than water when the fever doesn't break, the man said gently. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 folded bills. He held them out toward her. Take this, he said. Go to the pharmacy on the corner. Ask for children's fever medicine and oral rehydration salts. It will help for now. Esperanza stared at the money. 200 pesos. I can't accept this, she said quickly, shaking her head. I don't even know you. You don't need to, he replied, smiling faintly. Your grandson needs it. Her hands trembled as she reached for the bills. Thank you, she whispered. I swear I'll pay you back. I can work. I can clean. The man gently raised his hand, stopping her. You haven't eaten today, he said. Esperanza looked up at him, shocked. How do you know that? But before she could say more, the man was already stepping away, blending into the flow of people heading toward the market. She called out softly, but her voice was lost among vendors' calls and passing footsteps. Within seconds, he was gone. Esperanza stood there, the money clutched in her hand, her heart pounding. She didn't understand how he had known. She didn't understand why he had helped. She only knew one thing. She didn't have time to ask questions. She turned and hurried toward the pharmacy, moving faster than she had all day, holding on to those 2 small bills as if they were something far greater than money. As she walked, a strange thought crossed her mind. Quiet, unsettling, impossible to ignore. It felt as if help had arrived not by chance, but exactly on time. That night, Esperanza did not sleep. She sat on the floor beside the mattress, her back against the metal wall, watching Carlitos as if her eyes alone could keep him alive. The medicine helped at first. The fever eased just enough for his breathing to slow, just enough for his small body to relax. For the first time in days, Esperanza allowed herself to breathe. But hope, she would learn, can be fragile. Near midnight, Carlitos began to stir again. His skin grew hot beneath her hand. Sweat soaked his hair, plastering it to his forehead. His breathing quickened, shallow and uneven, as if his little chest were fighting for every breath. No, no, please, Esperanza whispered, reaching for the damp cloth again. She cooled his forehead, his neck, his arms. She counted his breaths. She murmured prayers she had learned as a child, prayers she had whispered at gravesides, prayers she had spoken when she had nothing left but words. Morning came without mercy. The fever dropped slightly with the medicine, then returned stronger by afternoon. By evening, Carlitos refused food. He barely opened his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was thin, distant, like it was coming from somewhere far away. Abuelita, he murmured, I'm tired. Esperanza felt a sharp pain cut through her chest. You just need to rest, my love, she said, forcing steadiness into her voice. Tomorrow you'll feel better, I promise. But promises felt empty now. The second night was worse. Carlitos cried out in his sleep, twisting weakly under the thin blanket. Esperanza held his hand and sang softly, the same lullaby she had sung to her own children decades earlier. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. By the third day, she had no money left. The medicine bottle was nearly empty. The jug of water was lighter. The small room felt tighter, darker, as if the walls were closing in on them both. Esperanza had not eaten since before she met the man at the clinic. Hunger gnawed at her, but she barely noticed. All she could see was Carlitos's face, paler now, his lips dry, his eyes sunken. She knelt beside him, her knees aching as they touched the cold floor. God, she whispered, pressing her forehead against the mattress, I've believed in you my whole life. I never asked you for easy days. I never asked you for more than I needed. Her voice broke. But please, I don't take him. Tears fell freely now, soaking into the thin fabric beneath her hands. He's all I have left. He hasn't even lived yet. If you need someone to suffer, take me. I'm ready, I'm tired. But leave him here. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Carlitos shifted, his small fingers curled around hers. Abuelita, he whispered, barely audible. Yes, my love, she answered quickly, leaning closer. God listens to us, he said, his eyes fluttering open just enough to meet hers. Esperanza swallowed hard. Yes, she said softly. He does. Carlitos frowned slightly, confused. Then why doesn't he help us? The question pierced her deeper than any insult, deeper than hunger or exhaustion. Esperanza didn't know how to answer. She brushed his hair gently and kissed his forehead. Sometimes, she whispered, help comes in ways we don't understand yet. That night, as the wind rattled the metal roof above them, Esperanza held her grandson close and waited, caught between faith and fear, wondering if this would be the night she lost the one person she loved more than her own life. By the afternoon of the fourth day, Esperanza knew she had only one place left to go. It was the place she had avoided for years. She wrapped Carlitos in a thin blanket and waited until his breathing steadied enough for her to leave him sleeping. Then she stepped outside, adjusted her worn shawl, and began the long walk toward the other side of the city, toward the neighborhood she no longer belonged to. The houses changed as she walked. Tin walls became brick. Dirt roads turned into smooth pavement. Small shops disappeared, replaced by manicured gardens and tall iron gates. Esperanza slowed as she reached the private street where her son Jorge lived. A security gate stood at the entrance, shining under the sun. She pressed the intercom with trembling fingers. Who is it? A woman's voice asked, sharp and distant. It's Esperanza, she replied. Jorge's mother. Please, I need to speak with him. There was a pause, too long. The gate buzzed and slowly opened. Esperanza walked in, her worn sandals echoing on the stone path. 2 cars sat in the driveway, new, clean, untouched by dust. She stopped at the front door and knocked. Daniela answered. She looked well-dressed, composed, her eyes cool. She did not invite Esperanza inside. Is Jorge here? Esperanza asked softly. He's working, Daniela replied. What do you need? Esperanza swallowed. My grandson, Carlitos, he's very sick. I need money to take him to the doctor. It's not much, just 800 pesos. I'll pay it back. I can clean. I can work. Daniela crossed her arms. Do you know how many times people come here asking for money, she said. Your family's always asking for something. Esperanza shook her head in confusion. I've never asked before. Well, others have, Daniela replied. And we can't keep helping everyone. We have expenses too. But he's your nephew, Esperanza whispered. He's Jorge's blood. Daniela's expression hardened. That doesn't change anything. Esperanza felt her knees weaken. Please, she said again, her voice barely holding together. I'm begging you. Daniela stepped back. I think it's time for you to leave. The door closed. Esperanza stood there, staring at the polished wood in front of her. She raised her hand and knocked again. Once, twice, 3 times. Go away, Daniela's voice shouted from inside. Or I'll call security. Esperanza slowly lowered her hand. Something inside her broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, like a final thread snapping. She turned and walked back toward the gate. As she stepped onto the street, a car passed too fast, splashing dirty water from a puddle onto her clothes. Esperanza didn't flinch. She simply closed her eyes and let the water run down her face. By the time she reached the metal shack, the sky was dark. She knelt beside Carlitos and placed her hand on his forehead. It burned hotter than ever. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice shaking. I tried everything. Tears fell freely now. God, she said aloud, no longer whispering, if you don't hear me, please hear this child. The wind rattled the metal roof above them, and in the silence that followed, Esperanza felt completely alone, abandoned by family, ignored by strangers, and standing at the very edge of her faith. The next morning, Esperanza left the metal shack before sunrise. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she couldn't stay still. Carlitos's fever had eased just enough for him to sleep, but his breathing was still uneven, fragile. She whispered that she would return soon, though she didn't know what soon meant anymore. Her feet carried her toward the center of the city, through streets that were slowly waking up. Vendors lifted metal shutters. The smell of coffee and frying oil filled the air. Life moved forward, indifferent to her fear. Then she saw him. Across the street, outside a small roadside eatery, sat the police officer. Ramirez. He was relaxed, leaning back in his chair, a large plate of chilaquiles in front of him. Eggs, beans, warm bread on the side. A cold soda sweated in his hand. He laughed at something on his phone, completely at ease. Esperanza felt heat rise in her chest. Not fear, not hesitation, but something sharper. Anger. Before she could stop herself, she crossed the street. Ramirez looked up and smirked when he recognized her. Well, look at that, he said loudly. The crying old lady. Esperanza stopped in front of him, her hands trembling at her sides. My grandson almost died, she said, her voice low but steady. Because you wouldn't help me. Ramirez chuckled, wiping his mouth with a napkin. Almost died, he repeated. That's not my problem, senora. I'm not a doctor. I'm not your savior. You're a police officer, Esperanza replied. You're supposed to protect people. Ramirez leaned forward, his smile disappearing. I protect who I want to protect. His voice dropped. People like you? People with nothing? You're not worth my time. Esperanza felt her knees shake, not from weakness, but from rage she had never allowed herself to feel before. She looked at the food on his table, at his uniform, at the ease with which he dismissed suffering. One day, she said clearly, each word cutting through the morning noise, God will make you pay for this. Ramirez burst out laughing. God? He said, leaning back again. If God existed, you wouldn't be living in a tin shack with nothing to eat. He waved his fork dismissively. But hey, if believing that makes you feel better, go ahead. Me? I'm going to enjoy my breakfast. Esperanza stared at him for a long moment. Then she turned away. She walked back toward the street, her heart pounding, her chest tight. Behind her, Ramirez called out, still laughing. That's right. Go home and cry. She didn't respond, but as she walked away, something strange happened. A man at a nearby table stood up. He was the same man from the clinic, the same calm eyes, the same simple clothes, the same presence that felt out of place and exactly where it needed to be. He approached Ramirez's table. Excuse me, the man said softly. Ramirez looked up, annoyed. What do you want? I just wanted to ask you something, the man replied, pulling out the chair across from him and sitting down without waiting for permission. Ramirez frowned. Who do you think you are? Just someone who was listening, the man said gently. Well, stop listening and mind your own business. The man smiled, not mockingly, but sadly. You know, he said, that woman has worked her entire life. She's suffered more than you can imagine. And still, she believes. He paused. But you, he continued, you have everything, and yet you have nothing. Ramirez shot to his feet, knocking the chair backward. Say that again. The man stood slowly, meeting his eyes without fear. You heard me. Ramirez's hand twitched near his belt. You'd better leave before I arrest you. The man nodded calmly. I'm leaving. He took a step away, then stopped. One day, he added quietly, you'll need help, and on that day you'll remember her. You'll remember what it feels like when the world turns its back on you. Then he walked away. Ramirez stood there frozen, his appetite gone, his heart beating just a little faster than before. Ramirez stood there long after the man had walked away. The clatter of dishes returned, the cook shouted orders from inside the eatery, and traffic hummed past as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet something inside Ramirez refused to settle. He sat back down, staring at the plate in front of him. The food was still warm. He lifted his fork, then lowered it again. He wasn't hungry anymore. What are you looking at? He snapped when he noticed a couple of people watching him from nearby tables. They quickly turned away. Ramirez tried to laugh it off, telling himself the man was just another busybody, another fool with opinions. But the words wouldn't leave him alone. You have everything, and yet you have nothing. He pushed the plate away and stood up, irritation crawling up his spine. He paid quickly and walked off, his boots striking the pavement harder than necessary. With every step, the image of the old woman's face flashed in his mind, her knees on the concrete, her shaking hands, her eyes searching the crowd for help that never came. He shook his head. Get a grip, he told himself. You did nothing wrong. But the street felt different now. As he walked toward his patrol car, a strange unease settled in his chest. Not fear, not guilt, something quieter. He had spent years wearing a uniform that gave him authority, certainty, distance. People obeyed. People stepped aside. He decided who mattered and who didn't. And yet, for the first time, someone had looked at him as if the uniform meant nothing, as if he were just a man. The rest of his shift passed in a blur. He answered calls, filled out paperwork, drove the same streets he always did. But he noticed things he hadn't before. An elderly man struggling to cross the road, a mother holding a crying child outside a pharmacy, a vendor arguing with a customer over a few coins. Normally, he would have kept moving. Now, every face felt like an accusation. When his shift finally ended, the sun was already low. Ramirez climbed into the patrol car and started the engine. The familiar rumble usually brought comfort, control. Tonight it didn't. As he drove, his thoughts returned again and again to the man with the calm eyes, to the certainty in his voice, to the way he spoke as if he knew what was coming. Ramirez tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Stupid, he muttered. Just words. But deep down, something had already shifted. He didn't know it yet, but a seed had been planted. Not of fear, but of understanding. And seeds once planted have a way of growing, even in the hardest ground. Ahead of him, the streetlights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the road, and somewhere in those shadows, consequences were quietly taking shape. Esperanza returned to the neighborhood just as the sun began to sink behind the buildings. Her steps were slower now. The confrontation with Ramirez had drained what little strength she had left. She stopped once at the corner, steadying herself against a wall, breathing through the tightness in her chest. Carlitos needed food. That thought pushed her forward. She walked into the small grocery shop on the corner, the same one she had visited countless times before. The bell above the door chimed softly. Behind the counter stood Don Ricardo, a man with gray hair and tired eyes who had known Esperanza for years. Don Ricardo, she said quietly, approaching the counter, could you please let me buy some tortillas and beans on credit? My grandson hasn't eaten. He looked at her with a mix of sadness and discomfort. Esperanza, he sighed, lowering his voice. I wish I could help you. You know that. But you already owe me from last week. If I keep giving credit, I won't be able to pay my suppliers. I understand, she replied quickly, nodding. I'll pay you back. I always do. He shook his head slowly. Not today. I'm sorry. Esperanza felt something sink inside her chest, but she didn't argue. She simply turned and walked back outside, her hands empty, her shoulders heavy. That was when it happened. A white van pulled up beside her, tires crunching against the curb. The passenger window rolled down. Excuse me, a woman called out. Esperanza turned, startled. The woman looked to be in her early 40s, well-dressed, wearing dark glasses. She studied Esperanza carefully, as if confirming something. Are you Esperanza? The woman asked. Yes, Esperanza replied cautiously. Do I know you? Not directly, the woman said. But someone told me about you. He said you needed help. Esperanza's heart skipped. Who? The woman hesitated, then shook her head. He didn't give me his name. I met him at the market a few days ago. He spoke about you and your grandson. The way he talked, I believed him. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This is for you. Esperanza opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were bills, a lot of them, 2,000 pesos. No, Esperanza said quickly, trying to hand it back. I can't accept this. This is too much. The woman smiled gently. It's a gift. You don't have to pay it back. But why? Esperanza asked, her voice breaking. The woman's eyes softened. Because once, when I had nothing, someone helped me. Now it's my turn. Before Esperanza could say another word, the woman rolled up the window and drove away, leaving behind nothing but the hum of the engine and a stunned silence. Esperanza stood there, clutching the envelope, tears streaming down her face. She didn't question it anymore. She ran back into the shop. Don Ricardo, she said breathlessly, placing money on the counter. Here is what I owe you. His eyes widened. Where did you get this? Someone helped me, she replied simply. She bought tortillas, beans, rice, eggs, milk, and fruit. More food than she had seen in her home in weeks. She carried the bags back to the metal shack, her arms aching, her heart lighter with every step. That night, Carlitos ate. He chewed slowly, carefully, as if afraid the food might disappear. Then he smiled. Thank you, abuelita, he whispered, wrapping his arms around her neck. Esperanza held him tightly, tears of relief soaking into his hair. She didn't know who the man at the market truly was, but she knew this much. Help had not come once. It had multiplied. The next morning, Esperanza woke before dawn. For the first time in days, the metal shack felt different, not bigger, not newer, but lighter. Carlitos slept more peacefully, his breathing steadier, his fever no longer burning through the thin blanket. She placed her hand on his forehead and felt only warmth, not fire. She closed her eyes and whispered thanks. With the little money that remained after buying food, Esperanza did something she hadn't done in years. She went to the market and bought masa. The vendor looked surprised when she asked for it. Tamales? He guessed. Esperanza nodded. Yes, tamales. Her hands remembered what her body had nearly forgotten. Back in another life, before grief and loss had piled up like years of dust, she had been known for her tamales. People used to say they tasted like home, like patience, like love. She spent the morning preparing them, mixing the dough, seasoning the chicken, folding the corn husks carefully, one by one. The work was slow, and her back ached, but she didn't stop. With every motion, something inside her steadied. This was something she could do. By noon, the pot steamed gently. The familiar scent filled the shack, wrapping around her like a memory she didn't know she needed. When the tamales were ready, she packed them into a basket, kissed Carlitos' forehead, and stepped back into the world. She chose a corner near the market, beside a flower stand. She stood there quietly at first, unsure. Tamales calientes, she finally called out. Homemade. People passed by without looking. Some didn't hear her. Others pretended not to. Esperanza kept standing. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Just when doubt began to creep back in, a young delivery worker stopped. He wore a worn uniform and looked exhausted. How much? He asked. 15 pesos, Esperanza replied. He bought two, unwrapped one, took a bite. His eyes widened. These are really good, he said, smiling. My mom used to make them like this. He finished both and wiped his hands. Tomorrow I'll come back and buy a dozen. Esperanza felt her throat tighten. Thank you, she said softly. By the end of the afternoon, she had sold half the basket. It wasn't much, just a few bills folded carefully into her pocket. But it was enough. Enough to feel human again. She walked home with a small smile, her steps lighter than they had been in days. Carlitos met her at the door, sitting up on the mattress. Did you sell them, Abuelita? Yes, my love, she said, setting the basket down. People like them. I knew it, Carlitos said proudly. You're the best cook in the world. Esperanza laughed, a quiet, surprised sound. That night, as Carlitos slept, Esperanza knelt beside the mattress and clasped her hands. Thank you, she whispered, not for the money, but for the strength to stand back up. Outside, the city moved on, and somewhere unseen, a quiet hand was still guiding the pieces into place. Night fell hard and fast. Ramirez finished his shift later than usual, his shoulders tense, his jaw clenched. He didn't know why the day had felt heavier than others. Nothing extraordinary had happened, no reports, no confrontations worth remembering. And yet, he carried an unease he couldn't shake. He climbed into the patrol car and turned the key. The engine sputtered. He tried again. A weak click. Then nothing. Come on, he muttered, striking the steering wheel with the heel of his hand. The dashboard lights flickered once and died. Ramirez stepped out of the car and popped the hood. Steam curled faintly into the night air. He stared at the maze of hoses and metal, realizing how useless he was without the authority of his badge, or the movement of the car that carried it. He reached for his phone. No signal. The street was dark, far from the center, lined with closed warehouses and silent buildings. The wind cut through his uniform, colder than he expected. He stood there for a moment, listening to the quiet, feeling something unfamiliar press against his chest. Vulnerability. Just my luck, he said aloud, trying to laugh it off. He started walking. At first he was confident. He knew the city. He'd walked worse streets in worse conditions. But after 15 minutes, the cold crept in. His feet ached. His mouth grew dry. The night seemed longer than it should have been. An hour passed. Finally, a gas station appeared ahead, its lights glowing like a promise. Ramirez quickened his pace and pushed through the door. Hey, he said to the young attendant behind the counter. Can I use your phone? My patrol car broke down and I don't have signal. The attendant glanced at him, unimpressed. We don't have a phone here. Ramirez frowned. Every gas station has a phone. This one doesn't. I'm a police officer, Ramirez said, gesturing to his uniform. I need help. The attendant shrugged, eyes already back on his screen. I can't help you. Ramirez felt irritation flare, sharp and hot. He wanted to raise his voice, to demand respect, to remind the kid who he was, but the words stuck in his throat. He walked back outside without saying another word. Further down the road, the smell of grilled meat drifted through the air. A taco stand stood under a single bulb, a man cleaning the grill. Ramirez approached slowly. Can you spare a taco? He asked, the words tasting bitter. I haven't eaten. The man looked him over. Here, everything is paid, he replied. No money, no food. Ramirez nodded once and turned away. As he walked into the darkness again, something settled deep inside him. Quiet, heavy, undeniable. This was what it felt like, to need help and be told no. And for the first time in his life, Ramirez understood exactly who he had been. Ramirez kept walking. At first he told himself it was temporary. Someone would pass. A car would slow down. A door would open. Help always came, especially for someone like him. But the street stayed empty. His boots scraped against the pavement, the sound echoing too loudly in the quiet night. The cold crept deeper into his bones. Hunger tightened in his stomach, twisting slowly, insistently. He checked his phone again, lifting it toward the sky as if that might change something. Nothing. As he walked, memories began to surface, uninvited and sharp. An old woman on her knees, hands pressed together, a voice trembling as it begged. Go cry in your house. The words replayed in his head, over and over, no longer sounding clever or powerful. They sounded small, ugly. He passed another gas station, its lights already off. A closed bakery, a bus stop with an empty bench. Each place felt like a question with the same answer. No. After more than 2 hours, his legs burned. His throat was dry. He slowed down, bending forward slightly as he walked. The weight of his uniform suddenly unbearable. The badge on his chest felt heavier than the rest of him. He thought about knocking on a door. He imagined a man opening it just enough to see his face. The hesitation, the quick excuse. "I can't help you. Not tonight. Go somewhere else." Ramirez stopped walking. The realization hit him without warning. This wasn't bad luck. This wasn't coincidence. This was exactly what Esperanza had felt. The confusion, the humiliation, the slow, sinking understanding that no one was coming. For the first time, Ramirez didn't feel angry at the people who refused him. He felt ashamed of himself. He remembered her eyes, how they searched the crowd, not for miracles, but for a single person willing to care. He remembered the way she stood back up, knees cracking, dignity bruised but not broken. And he remembered laughing. A sharp ache formed behind his eyes. He resumed walking, slower now, quieter. When he finally reached his neighborhood, his body felt hollow. He unlocked his door with shaking hands and stepped inside. The warmth hit him all at once. His wife, Patricia, came out of the kitchen, concern already on her face. "Where have you been? I've been calling you." "The car broke down," he said, sinking onto the couch. "No one would help." She frowned. "What do you mean, no one?" Ramirez let out a short, bitter laugh. "Exactly that. No phone, no food, no help." Patricia studied him closely. "You're a police officer." He nodded slowly. "That's what I thought, too." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The silence stretched between them. Something inside him had cracked open. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough to let the truth in. That night, Ramirez didn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw a woman kneeling on the pavement, and for the first time, he wished he could go back and answer her prayer. At 3 in the morning, Ramirez gave up on sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor as if answers might appear there. The house was quiet. Patricia slept in the next room, unaware of the storm tearing through him. He stood, pulled on a jacket, and stepped outside. He didn't know where he was going. His feet decided for him. The streets were nearly empty, washed pale by moonlight. Traffic lights blinked to no one. The city felt stripped of noise and excuses. With each step, Ramirez felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter without the patrol car, heavier with memory. Before he realized it, he was back at the market. The food stalls were closed now, chairs stacked, tables flipped. The place where he had eaten days earlier looked smaller in the dark, almost fragile. He stopped near the same spot, the moon casting long shadows across the pavement. Someone was standing there. Ramirez froze. It was the man, the same calm posture, the same stillness that felt out of place, as if the night itself had paused to make room for him. "You came," the man said quietly. Ramirez swallowed. "How did you know I would?" The man smiled, not triumphantly, not smugly, but with something like understanding. "Because you couldn't stay away." Ramirez took a step closer. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked, "Do you remember the woman you humiliated?" Ramirez nodded, his throat tight. "I can't stop thinking about her." "Do you know what happened after you left?" the man asked. "No. Her grandson almost died," the man said gently. "Not because of sickness alone, but because no one helped. Not you, not the neighbors, not the family, no one." The words landed like stones. "I didn't know," Ramirez whispered. "Of course you didn't," the man replied. "You never asked." Ramirez closed his eyes. Images flooded back. The kneeling figure, the tears, the laughter he wished he could erase. "I understand now," he said, his voice breaking, "what it feels like to need help and hear no." The man stepped closer, his gaze steady. "And what will you do with that understanding?" Ramirez looked up. "I don't know," he admitted. "I want to fix it, but I don't know how." The man tilted his head slightly. "Do you truly not know? Or are you afraid to do what you already know you must? Ramirez's hands trembled. Tell me, he said. What do you want me to do? The man's voice softened. What you were meant to do from the beginning. He turned to leave. Wait, Ramirez called out. At least tell me your name. The man stopped. Moonlight touched his face, and for the briefest moment, something changed. His eyes seemed brighter, deeper, like light reflecting off water that had no bottom. I am someone who never abandons those who suffer, he said, even when the whole world turns its back. And then he was gone, not walking away, not fading slowly, just gone. Ramirez stood alone in the market, his heart pounding, breath shallow, certain of one thing and terrified of another. He didn't know who that man was, but he knew exactly what he had to do next. The sun had barely risen when Ramirez began looking for her. He asked vendors at the market. He stopped people on the street. Most shrugged, some shook their heads. Finally, a fruit seller pointed down a narrow road. I think she lives in Lomas de Polanco, he said, a tin shack at the end of the street. Ramirez drove slowly through the neighborhood, his patrol car moving past uneven pavement and patched roofs. Children played barefoot near doorways. Women swept dust that never truly went away. At the end of the street, he saw it, a small metal shack, rusted, crooked, quiet. He parked and stepped out, his heart pounding harder than it ever had during a chase. He walked to the door and knocked. It opened slowly. Esperanza stood there. The moment she saw him, her face changed, surprise, then fear, then anger, all passing like shadows across her eyes. What do you want? She asked coldly. I need to talk to you, Ramirez said. Please. I have nothing to say to you. I know, he replied, but I have something to say to you. She hesitated, then stepped outside, closing the door behind her. Say it. Ramirez swallowed. Words had never been this hard. I came to apologize, he said finally, for what I did, for how I treated you, for humiliating you when you were begging for help. Esperanza raised an eyebrow. Apologize? Yes, he said quickly, the words rushing out now. I was cruel. I abused my power. I laughed when you were desperate. I have no excuse. She crossed her arms. And why now? Ramirez lowered his eyes. Because something happened to me. Something that made me feel what you felt. Needing help. Being ignored. Being told no. He looked back up, tears gathering. And I realized I've done that to people my entire life. Especially to you. Esperanza studied him in silence. The morning breeze lifted the edge of her shawl. From inside the shack came the faint sound of a child breathing. And you think saying sorry fixes that? She asked. No, Ramirez said softly. I know it doesn't. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded bill. This isn't payment. It's not charity. It's the only way I know to try to repair a little of the harm I caused. Esperanza stared at the money, then at his face. I don't need your money, she said quietly. I know, he replied. But please, let me do this. She hesitated. Slowly, she took the bill. Listen to me, Esperanza said, her voice firm but calm. Money does not erase humiliation. It does not erase tears. It does not erase the night I thought my grandson would die. Ramirez nodded, tears finally spilling down his cheeks. But, she continued, I forgive you. He looked up, stunned. I forgive you, she repeated. Not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to carry hatred in my heart. I've carried enough pain already. Ramirez broke down. He covered his face, shoulders shaking, crying the way he never had before. Not out of anger, not out of frustration, but out of regret. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. Esperanza placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Go in peace, she said. And if you truly want forgiveness, then change. The world has enough cruelty. Be something else. Ramirez nodded, wiping his face. He turned back toward his patrol car, then stopped. There's one more thing, he said. That man, the one who helped you. I saw him too. Esperanza felt a chill. She looked up at the sky, then back at him. I don't know who he is, she said softly, but I believe he's someone who never leaves us. Someone who sees. Ramirez nodded slowly. As he drove away, Esperanza stood quietly in the morning light, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Because forgiveness had done what anger never could. It had set them both free. Change did not arrive all at once. It came quietly. In the days that followed, Ramirez kept his word. He stopped when he saw an elderly woman struggling with heavy bags. He drove a mother and her feverish child to the clinic without asking for anything in return. He stood between street vendors and men who tried to intimidate them. At first, his fellow officers laughed. "What happened to you?" they joked. "Did you turn into a saint?" Ramirez said nothing. He didn't need to explain. Something inside him had shifted, and he knew there was no going back. Meanwhile, Esperanza's life continued to rebuild. Slowly, honestly, one small step at a time. Her tamales began to sell more each morning. People started looking for her by name. She earned just enough to pay rent, buy food, and save a little for emergencies. Carlitos regained his strength. He laughed again. He ran outside with a battered ball, his voice filling the street with life. But the greatest change wasn't the money, it was the absence of fear. One afternoon, as Esperanza returned from the market, she found a bag resting against the door of the metal shack. Inside were rice, beans, chicken, fruit, bread, and a folded note for the woman who never lost her faith. With love, from someone who was always there. Esperanza pressed the note to her chest. She didn't look around. She didn't ask questions. She already knew. Weeks passed. Then one day, while selling tamales, a familiar figure appeared. "Sandra?" Esperanza froze. Her daughter stood in front of her, thinner than before, eyes tired, hands shaking. Without a word, Sandra dropped to her knees. "Forgive me, Mama," she sobbed. "I abandoned you. I abandoned my son. Everything fell apart. I had nowhere else to go." Esperanza stepped forward and lifted her up. "There is nothing to forgive," she said gently. "You are my daughter." That night, 3 generations slept under the same tin roof, crowded, uncomfortable, but together. For the first time in years, the shack felt full. Months later, as the sun dipped low and painted the street gold, Esperanza sat outside, Carlitos playing nearby. Across the road, a figure stood quietly, a man in simple clothes, calm eyes, a peaceful smile. Esperanza met his gaze. She didn't stand. She didn't wave. She only whispered, "Thank you." The man nodded once, then turned and walked away, fading into the light of the evening. Esperanza closed her eyes, her heart at rest. She finally understood. God doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes he comes quietly. Sometimes he sends someone to stop. Sometimes he changes a heart. And sometimes the greatest miracle of all is discovering that you were never alone. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Heaven Walks with Us and stay with us for more true-to-life stories about faith, mercy, and lives transformed when hope seems lost. Share this video with someone who feels unseen, forgotten, or close to giving up. You never know. You might be the reason they believe again. And remember, sometimes the greatest miracle is simply stopping and choosing compassion.